The Velrathi had watched Earth for almost 10 years before they decided to make contact. Their small drones flew high above the clouds, recording everything they saw. They watched humans build hospitals and schools. They watched doctors travel to poor countries to help sick children. They watched strangers pull each other from burning cars and flooded rivers. They watched people share food with those who had nothing. The Velrathi High Council studied all of this information very carefully. They held many meetings in their great hall, a massive room made of black stone that floated above their home world. Commander Xyrith stood before the council, his violet-scaled skin shining under the pale lights. He had 4 arms, each one ending in 3 long fingers, and his yellow eyes moved slowly as he spoke. "These humans are a soft species," he said. "They are ruled by their feelings. They care too much about each other. This makes them weak." The council agreed. Every member nodded their large heads. The humans would be easy to control. They would be useful workers, nothing more. The first Velrathi ship landed in Geneva on a cool spring morning. The sky was gray, and a light rain was falling. Thousands of people had gathered behind metal barriers, their faces showing a mix of fear and excitement. Camera drones flew everywhere, sending images to every corner of the planet. Commander Xyrith walked down the ramp of his ship with 12 of his officers behind him. His boots made heavy sounds on the wet ground. He looked at the crowd of humans and felt nothing but mild curiosity. They were so small, so fragile-looking. Their skin was soft and came in different shades of brown and pink. They had only 2 arms and 2 eyes. How had such weak creatures ever survived on their planet? Ambassador Linda Morris stepped forward to greet them. She was a woman of 53 years, with gray hair cut short and warm brown eyes. She had spent her whole career building bridges between nations, and now she would try to build a bridge between worlds. "Welcome to Earth," she said, her voice calm and friendly. "We are honored by your visit." She held out her hand. Xyrith looked at it for a moment, not understanding. One of his officers whispered an explanation, and Xyrith reached out with one of his 4 hands to grip hers. Her hand was warm and soft. He could feel her pulse beating beneath her skin. "So fragile," he thought. "We bring greetings from the Velrathi Dominion," Xyrith said through his translation device. "And from the Greater Galactic Consortium." Linda smiled. "Please, come inside. We have prepared refreshments. There is much to discuss." She led them into a large building where tables had been set with food and drinks. Xyrith watched as humans offered them small cups of a dark, bitter liquid they called coffee. They offered sweet cakes and fresh fruits. They asked questions about Velrathi culture with genuine interest in their eyes. Everything Xyrith saw confirmed what he already believed. These humans were kind and generous. They wanted to be liked. They wanted to make friends. They were not a threat to anyone. Over the next 3 years, humanity joined the Galactic Consortium as a junior member. The consortium was made up of 47 species spread across thousands of star systems. Some were ancient civilizations that had traveled among the stars for millions of years. Others were younger, like the Velrathi, who had only achieved spaceflight 10,000 years ago. Humans were the newest and, in the eyes of most consortium members, the least important. The consortium gave humanity simple jobs. Human ships carried medical supplies to planets struck by disease. Human volunteers helped rebuild cities destroyed by natural disasters. Human doctors worked in refugee camps on the borders of war zones. It was good work, important work, and the humans did it without complaint. Linda Morris traveled to the consortium capital many times during those years. She sat in meetings with representatives from dozens of species. She listened to their discussions about trade and territory and military alliances. She noticed that no one ever asked for humanity's opinion on important matters. Humans were there to help, not to decide. She also noticed something else. The other species were always surprised by how hard humans worked. They were surprised by how much humans cared about strangers from other worlds. A Velrathi official once told her that he found human compassion strange and somewhat unsettling. "Why do you help others so much?" he asked. "What do you gain from it?" Linda thought about the question for a long moment. "We help because we can," she said. "Because we know what it feels like to suffer. Because we believe that kindness makes the universe a better place." The official tilted his large head. "Fascinating," he said. "And very naive." Linda just smiled. She did not argue. She had learned that sometimes it was better to let others underestimate you. Back on Earth, life continued as normal. Children went to school. People went to work. Families gathered for holidays. The fact that humanity had joined a galactic civilization changed some things, but not others. There were new technologies and new medicines. There were new stars to visit and new wonders to see. But humans were still humans. In military academies and training camps around the world, soldiers still learned to fight. They studied tactics and strategy. They trained their bodies and sharpened their minds. They hoped they would never have to use their skills, but they prepared anyway. That was the human way. Hope for peace, but prepare for war. None of the consortium species ever visited these places. They saw no reason to. They had already decided what humans were. Gentle creatures. Soft-hearted helpers. Useful for charity work, but not much else. They never opened the history books that sat in every human library. They never watched the old films that showed soldiers storming beaches under heavy fire. They never read the stories of resistance fighters who had hidden in forests and mountains, striking back against invaders who thought they had already won. They never learned about the human capacity for violence, for survival, for absolute refusal to surrender. Commander Zyrith returned to the Velrathi homeworld and gave his final report to the High Council. "Humans are no threat to us or anyone else," he said with complete confidence. "They are too gentle to ever cause trouble." The Council accepted his report without question. The file on humanity was marked as complete and stored away. There seemed to be nothing more to learn about this small, kind species from a small, unremarkable planet. They could not have been more wrong. New Haven was a small moon orbiting a gas giant in the Kepler system, about 40 light-years from Earth. The first colonists had arrived 12 years ago, landing on red soil under a pale orange sky. They had built their homes with their own hands, digging foundations and raising walls while strange birds circled overhead. Now 12,000 people called New Haven home. There were farms growing wheat and corn and vegetables. There were schools where children learned about both Earth and their new world. There was a community center in the middle of the main settlement where people gathered for meals and celebrations. The smell of fresh bread often drifted through the streets, baked by a woman named Grace Porter, who had owned a bakery back in Ohio. Colonel Marcus Webb had come to New Haven 5 years ago, after 30 years of military service. He was 62 years old now, with gray hair and a face lined by time and hard experience. His left knee ached on cold mornings, a reminder of a bad landing during a combat jump when he was younger. His hands, which had once held weapons in dozens of different countries, now spent most of their time in the dirt of his small garden. He grew tomatoes and peppers and green beans. He watched his 2 grandchildren, a boy of 8 and a girl of 6, play in the yard behind his house. Their laughter was the sweetest sound he had ever heard. It was better than any medal or commendation he had ever received. His neighbor was a woman named Diane Reyes. She was 58, with short black hair going gray at the temples and dark eyes that missed nothing. She had served as a sergeant major in the Army, spending most of her career training special operations soldiers. She could field strip any weapon blindfolded. She could track a man through a forest without leaving a single footprint. She could kill with her bare hands in a dozen different ways. Now she grew grapes. She was trying to make wine, though her first few batches had been, in her own words, absolutely terrible. She kept trying anyway. That was who she was. Marcus and Diane were not the only veterans on New Haven. Nearly 800 former soldiers, Marines, pilots, and special operators had settled on the colony. Some had come with families. Others had come alone, seeking quiet after lives filled with noise and violence. They had all seen too much. They had all done things that kept them awake at night. New Haven was supposed to be their fresh start. Patrick Cole lived on the eastern edge of the settlement. He was 45, tall and thin, with steady hands and eyes that could spot movement at impossible distances. He had been a sniper for 15 years before a piece of shrapnel in his shoulder ended his career. Now he taught the colony's children how to hunt, how to track animals, how to survive in the wilderness. Christina Hayes ran the colony's communication center. She was a former Navy officer, 39 years old. With red hair she kept tied back in a practical ponytail. She had coordinated fleet movements during 3 different conflicts. Now she coordinated supply shipments and sent messages back to Earth. It was quieter work, and she was grateful for it. There were hundreds of others like them. Mechanics who had fixed tanks under enemy fire. Medics who had saved lives in the chaos of battle. Pilots who had flown through storms of anti-aircraft fire. Engineers who had built bridges while bullets flew around them. All of them had come to New Haven hoping to leave war behind forever. On a quiet Tuesday morning, everything changed. Marcus was in his garden when he heard the warning sirens. The sound cut through the peaceful morning air like a knife. He dropped his tools and ran toward the community center, his bad knee screaming with every step. By the time he arrived, dozens of people had already gathered. Christina Hayes stood at the front of the room, her face pale as she read from a tablet. 3 ships have entered orbit, she said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. They are not responding to our communications. They are Kreth Imperium vessels. A murmur ran through the crowd. Everyone knew about the Kreth. They were a warrior species from the far side of the galaxy, known for their brutality. They conquered worlds and enslaved populations. They had been at war with various consortium species for centuries. What do they want? Someone asked. Christina swallowed hard. They've sent one message. They demand our immediate surrender. They say we will be taken as slaves. They say resistance will result in the destruction of the entire colony. Silence fell over the room. Marcus looked around at the faces of his neighbors. He saw fear. He saw shock. He saw parents pulling their children close. Then he saw something else. In the eyes of the veterans scattered through the crowd, he saw something harder. Something colder. Something that had been sleeping for years, but was now waking up. Have we contacted Earth? Marcus asked. Christina nodded. We sent a distress signal immediately. The consortium responded within 2 hours. And? Her jaw tightened. They said intervention is not strategically viable. They send their condolences. Marcus felt a familiar anger rising in his chest. The same anger he had felt many times before in many different wars. The anger of being abandoned. The anger of being dismissed. The anger of being told that your life did not matter enough to fight for. He looked at Diane. She was standing near the back of the room, her arms crossed over her chest. Their eyes met. No words were needed between them. They had served together decades ago. They knew each other's thoughts as well as they knew their own. Diane pushed through the crowd until she stood beside Marcus. She turned to face the people of New Haven, her voice cutting through the frightened whispers. I'm not surrendering, she said simply. I'm not becoming anyone's slave. And I'm not watching these people take our home. Patrick Cole stepped forward from the crowd. then Christina Hayes, then others, one by one. Veterans who had thought their fighting days were over. Men and women who had come to New Haven, seeking peace, but who remembered all too well how to make war. Marcus Webb looked at them all. His family was here. His grandchildren were here. Everything he loved was on this small moon, and he would not let it be taken without a fight. "The Kreth think we're just farmers and families," he said. "They think we're soft, like everyone else in the galaxy thinks. They have no idea what they're walking into." He turned to Christina. "How long until they land ground forces?" 48 hours at most." Marcus nodded slowly. 48 hours was not much time, but it was enough. "Then we have work to do." The news spread through the Galactic Consortium like fire through dry grass. Every species with access to communication networks heard the reports from New Haven. A human farming colony had been attacked by the Kreth Imperium. The colony was fighting back. The colony was winning. At first, no one believed it. The Kreth were one of the most feared warrior species in the galaxy. They had conquered dozens of worlds. Their armies had never been defeated by a civilian population. The reports had to be wrong or exaggerated or some kind of human propaganda. Then the images started coming through. Kreth warships sent drones to record the battle below, and those recordings were intercepted by Consortium intelligence. The galaxy watched in stunned silence as human farmers ambushed Kreth soldiers. They watched a 62-year-old man lead a counterattack that drove back a force 3 times his size. They watched a woman with gray hair and a rifle pick off enemy commanders from impossible distances. Commander Zyrith sat in his private chamber on the Valrathi homeworld and watched the footage over and over. His 4 hands gripped the arms of his chair so tightly that the metal bent beneath his fingers. "This cannot be right," he said to his aide. "These are the same humans I studied. The same species that builds hospitals and feeds the hungry. They should not be capable of this." His aide had no answer. The footage spoke for itself. On the Consortium capital, Ambassador Linda Morris requested an emergency meeting with the full council. She arrived in the great chamber wearing her formal diplomatic uniform, her back straight and her face calm. Hundreds of alien representatives watched her walk to the speaking platform, their many eyes following her every movement. "You all know why I am here," she began, her voice carrying through the vast room. "The Kreth Imperium has attacked a human colony. Our people are fighting for their lives. And when we asked for help, you told us that intervention was not strategically viable." A murmur ran through the chamber. Several Varathi representatives shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Linda activated the holographic display behind her. Images appeared in the air, huge and impossible to ignore. The first showed human soldiers charging a beach under heavy fire, waves crashing around them as explosions tore the sand apart. The second showed resistance fighters hiding in a forest, their faces young but their eyes old. The third showed a city reduced to rubble, with human figures still moving through the destruction, still fighting. "You classified us as gentle," Linda said. "You watched us build hospitals and schools. You watched us help refugees and heal the sick. And you decided that this was all we were. Kind, soft creatures useful for charity work, but not much else." She paused, letting her words sink in. "You were half right. We are kind. We do value compassion. We believe in helping those who cannot help themselves. This is not weakness. This is choice." The holographic display changed again. Now it showed images from New Haven. Human colonists fighting from rooftops and tunnels. Veterans leading attacks with weapons they had built from farming equipment. Children running messages through streets filled with enemy soldiers. Every human who has ever offered a helping hand has also learned how to make a fist. Every doctor who heals wounds knows exactly where to strike to cause the greatest damage. Every teacher who educates children also teaches them how to survive. This is our history. This is who we are. She looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of as many representatives as she could. We do not want war. We never wanted war. But when war comes to us, we do not run. We do not surrender. We fight with everything we have until the last breath leaves our bodies. This is the part of humanity you never bothered to study. This is the lesson the Kreth are learning right now. The chamber was silent. For the first time in living memory, the Galactic Consortium had nothing to say. On New Haven, the battle had reached a turning point. General Throck had lost over 3,000 soldiers in 5 days. His supplies were running low. His communications were still being jammed. His soldiers were afraid, something he had never seen before. Marcus Webb led a dawn attack on the Kreth command post. 200 human fighters moved through the morning mist like shadows, their movements silent and coordinated. They had practiced this kind of assault 1,000 times in training, back when they thought their fighting days were over. Their bodies remembered even when their minds wanted to forget. The Kreth guards never saw them coming. The perimeter defenses fell in minutes. By the time the sun was fully up, the command post was in human hands in general. Throck's second in command was dead. Throck himself escaped with a handful of bodyguards, fleeing toward the landing zone where his dropships waited. He was not thinking about victory anymore. He was thinking about survival. He was thinking about how he would explain this disaster to his superiors. Diane. Rays intercepted him 3 kilometers from the landing zone. Her team appeared from behind a low ridge, their weapons raised. Throck's bodyguards opened fire, but they were tired and scared, and their shots went wide. The humans did not miss. When the shooting stopped, General Throck stood alone. His bodyguards lay dead around him. His weapon was empty. A human woman walked toward him, her rifle pointed at his chest. "You can kill me," Throck said, forcing his voice to remain steady. "It will change nothing. More ships will come. More soldiers will come. You cannot win." Diane looked at him for a long moment. She could see the fear behind his pride. She had seen it many times before in many different enemies. "Maybe," she said, "but you won't be here to see it." She did not kill him. Instead, she bound his hands and brought him back to the settlement as a prisoner. A living general was more valuable than a dead one. He could answer questions. He could provide information about Kreth forces and plans. And his capture would send a message to both the Kreth Imperium and the wider galaxy. The humans of New Haven had not just survived. They had captured an enemy general. They had turned the hunters into the hunted dot in the consortium chamber. Ambassador Linda Morris received word of the capture. She allowed herself a small smile before turning back to the assembled representatives. "The situation has changed," she said. "General Throck of the Kreth Imperium is now a human prisoner. His army is in retreat. A farming colony of 12,000 people has defeated a force of 5,000 enemy warriors." She looked at the Vorathi delegation. Commander Zyrith could not meet her eyes. "I believe," Linda said quietly, "that it is time for the consortium to reconsider its assessment of humanity." No one argued with her. The Kreth dropships came down through the orange sky like dark metal birds. There were 50 of them, each one carrying 100 warriors. They landed in the open fields north of the main settlement, crushing crops under their heavy hulls. Steam rose from their cooling engines as the ramps dropped and the soldiers poured out. The Kreth were massive creatures, standing over 7 feet tall, with thick gray skin and 4 arms ending in clawed hands. Their faces were flat and brutal, with small black eyes and wide mouths filled with sharp teeth. Each one carried a plasma rifle capable of burning through steel. They wore heavy armor that had turned aside weapons on 100 different worlds. General Throck stood at the front of his army and looked at the Human settlement in the distance. Small buildings, dirt roads, fields of plants. It was a farming colony, nothing more. His intelligence officers had told him there were no military forces here. Just civilians. Just pray. Advance, he ordered. Take prisoners. Kill anyone who resists. The first patrol of 200 Kreth warriors marched toward the agricultural district. They walked in formation, confident and unhurried. They had done this many times before on many different worlds. The pattern was always the same. The weak species would run and hide. Some would fight back with farming tools and kitchen knives. It never made any difference. The Kreth always won. The patrol entered a narrow path between two large greenhouses. The morning sun cast long shadows across the red soil. Everything was quiet. Too quiet, one of the younger soldiers thought, but he said nothing. Veterans did not appreciate comments from new soldiers. They never heard the explosions coming. The mining charges had been buried beneath the path during the night, connected to a simple trigger held by a woman hiding 300 meters away. Her name was Sandra Blake, and she had spent 20 years as a combat engineer before coming to New Haven. Her hands did not shake as she pressed the button. The ground erupted in fire and thunder. The narrow path became a death trap as the charges went off in sequence, one after another. Kreth soldiers were thrown into the air. Others were buried under collapsed greenhouse walls. The survivors tried to retreat, but they found their escape route blocked by a wall of burning debris. Then the shooting started. Patrick Cole lay on his stomach on top of a water tower. His hunting rifle pressed against his shoulder. It was not a military weapon, but he had modified it himself. The scope was perfect. The barrel was clean. He had been killing targets at extreme distances for most of his adult life. And these aliens were not harder to hit than any other enemy. His first shot took a Kreth officer through the eye. His second shot killed the alien standing next to him. His third and fourth shots took down two more before the survivors even understood what was happening. By the time they started firing back at his position, he was already gone, sliding down a rope to a waiting vehicle that carried him to his next hiding spot. Across the colony, similar ambushes were unfolding. Diane Reyes led a team of 12 former special operators through the underground maintenance tunnels that connected the settlement's buildings. They emerged behind a Kreth squad that had taken shelter in a storage building, killing every alien before they could raise their weapons. Marcus Webb coordinated everything from a bunker beneath the community center. Maps covered every wall, marked with enemy positions and friendly forces. Christina Hayes sat beside him, her headset never leaving her ears as she relayed information from scouts hidden throughout the colony. Enemy reinforcements moving toward Sector 7, she reported. 200 troops with heavy weapons. Marcus studied the map. Tell Sanders to fall back to position, Charlie. Let them advance into the greenhouse complex, then hit them from both sides. The orders went out. The trap was set. Within an hour, another Kreth unit had been destroyed. General Throck received the reports with growing disbelief. 200 soldiers lost in the first hour. Then 300 more. His communications were being jammed somehow, making it impossible to coordinate his forces effectively. Patrols were disappearing without a trace. Officers were being killed by invisible shooters. This is impossible, he growled at his aide. These are farmers. They should be running. They should be begging for mercy. His aide said nothing. There was nothing to say. As night fell on New Haven, the real horror began for the Kreth. The humans knew their colony in ways the invaders never could. They knew every building, every tunnel, every shadow. They moved through the darkness like ghosts, striking and vanishing before the Kreth could respond. A Kreth commander woke to find a knife at his throat. The human holding it was a woman with gray hair and cold eyes. She asked him questions about troop positions and supply lines. He answered everyone. Then she was gone, leaving him tied to his bed. Alive but humiliated. Another unit found all their weapons sabotaged, the firing mechanisms removed during the night while they slept. A third unit woke to discover their food supplies poisoned. Not enough to kill, but enough to leave them weak and sick for days. The humans used everything they had. Farming machines became battering rams. Fertilizer became explosives. Irrigation pipes became weapons that sprayed boiling water. The colonists who were not veterans learned quickly, taking orders from those who had spent lifetimes learning the art of war. Grace Porter, the baker from Ohio, learned to reload weapons and treat wounds. She carried ammunition through dangerous streets to fighters who needed it. Her hands, which had kneaded bread dough that morning, were stained with blood and gunpowder by nightfall. Children, as young as 12, served as messengers, running through tunnels and back alleys with information that could not be trusted to jammed communications. They were fast and small and knew the colony better than any adult. The Kreth never even saw them. On the third day, General Throck requested reinforcements from orbit. He had lost nearly 2,000 soldiers. The human casualties were less than 50. It was impossible. It made no sense. These were supposed to be gentle creatures, the soft species that the galaxy laughed about. He did not understand. He could not understand. The humans he was fighting had spent decades learning war. They had fought in jungles and deserts and frozen mountains. They had survived things that would break most species. They had come to New Haven hoping for peace, but they had never forgotten how to fight. It was part of them, buried deep in their bones and blood. And now it had awakened. Marcus Webb stood at the window of his command bunker and watched fires burning in the distance. Somewhere out there, his grandchildren were hiding in a shelter with their mother. They were scared. Everyone was scared. But they were also fighting. Every single one of them. Diane Reyes entered the bunker, her face streaked with dirt and dried blood. "We just took out their forward supply depot," she said. "They'll have to pull back their eastern forces." Marcus nodded. "Good. What's the status on casualties?" 43 dead. 60 wounded. She paused. "They lost over 800 today." He closed his eyes for a moment. 43 people who had come here for peace. 43 neighbors and friends who would never see another sunrise. "It's not over," he said quietly. "No," Diane agreed. "But we're winning. They expected us to break. We didn't, and now they're the ones who are breaking." Outside, the night was filled with the sounds of distant gunfire and explosion. The battle for New Haven continued. The Kreth Imperium did not accept defeat easily. When word of General Throck's capture reached the Imperial Council, there was fury like nothing seen in generations. A farming colony had humiliated them. Soft, gentle humans had destroyed an army of Kreth warriors. The shame was unbearable. The Imperial Council ordered a final assault. They sent their largest battlecruiser, the Wrath of Kreth, carrying 20,000 of their best soldiers. The ship was a monster of metal and weapons, 2 kilometers long and bristling with plasma cannons capable of turning cities to ash. Its commander, Admiral Varkos, had never lost a battle in 40 years of service. "Burn the colony to the ground," the council ordered. "Leave nothing alive. Make an example that the galaxy will never forget." The Wrath of Kreth dropped out of hyperspace above New Haven on the 8th day of the battle. Its shadow fell across the land like the hand of death itself. Admiral Varkos looked down at the small moon and felt nothing but contempt. "Begin the bombardment," he ordered. "Target the main settlement." His weapons officer hesitated. "Sir, there are still Kreth soldiers on the surface. Prisoners and survivors who, they are acceptable losses. Fire." The first volley never reached the surface. The USS Defiance appeared from behind New Haven's largest mountain range, where it had been hiding since its arrival 3 hours earlier. The ship was humanity's first true interstellar warship, built in secret over the past 5 years. It was smaller than the Kreth battlecruiser, but it was fast and deadly and crewed by veterans who had volunteered the moment they heard about the attack on New Haven. Captain Samuel Grant stood on the bridge, watching the Kreth ship through the main view screen. He was 51 years old, with dark skin and calm eyes that had seen too many battles to feel fear anymore. His crew moved around him with quiet efficiency, each person knowing exactly what to do. "This is Captain Grant of the Earth vessel Defiance to Kreth Command," he transmitted, his voice carrying across the void. "You have attacked the human colony. You have killed human civilians. You have made a mistake that will echo through your history." Admiral Varkos laughed when he heard the message. One small ship against his mighty battlecruiser? The humans were insane. "Destroy them," he ordered. The battle began. The Defiance was smaller and faster, dodging through a storm of plasma fire that would have destroyed any other ship. Captain Grant had studied Kreth tactics for years. He knew how they thought, how they fought, how they died. He used that knowledge now, pushing his ship into positions the Kreth never expected. Lieutenant Amy Torres controlled the weapon systems, her fingers dancing across her console as she targeted the enemy ship's vulnerable points. She had served on 3 different destroyers before being selected for the Defiance. She had never missed a shot that mattered. "Taking out their forward shields," she reported, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. "Targeting their engine section." The Defiance's weapons were not as powerful as the Kreth's, but they were precise. Each shot struck exactly where it needed to strike. Shield generators exploded. Engine ports vented fire into space. Weapons batteries fell silent one by one. The wrath of Kreth was a giant, but it was slow and arrogant. Its commanders had never faced an enemy that could match their firepower and outmaneuver them at the same time. They tried to bring their main weapons to bear, but the Defiance was always somewhere else, striking and retreating and striking again. The battle lasted 7 hours. 7 hours of fire and death and desperate fighting. The Defiance took terrible damage. Whole sections of the ship were exposed to space. Nearly 200 crew members died at their stations, killed by explosions or suffocation or the cold void itself. But they did not retreat. They did not surrender. They fought with the same stubborn fury that their brothers and sisters had shown on the surface below Dot in the final hour. Captain Grant made a decision. The Defiance was dying. Its weapons were nearly depleted. Its shields were failing. But the Kreth battlecruiser was also crippled, drifting in space with most of its systems offline. "All hands," Grant said over the ship's communication system. "Prepare for ramming speed." His crew did not hesitate. They had known this might happen. They had accepted it when they volunteered. The Defiance accelerated toward the wrath of Kreth, its damaged engines screaming with the effort. Admiral Varkos watched the human ship approaching and felt something he had never felt before in his entire life. Fear. "Abandon ship," he ordered. But it was too late. The Defiance struck the Kreth battlecruiser at full speed, punching through its weakened hull and detonating inside. The explosion lit up the sky above New Haven like a second sun. On the surface, Marcus Webb looked up and watched the fireball spreading across the heavens. He did not know the names of the people who had died up there, but he knew who they were. They were soldiers, like him. They were humans who had given everything to protect strangers they had never met. "It's over," Diane said beside him. Her voice was hoarse from days of shouting orders. Her body was covered in dirt and blood. But she was alive. They were both alive. The remaining Kreth forces on the surface surrendered within hours. They had no reinforcements coming. Their fleet was destroyed. Their general was a prisoner. There was nothing left to fight for. 3 days later, a consortium delegation arrived on New Haven. Commander Xyrith was among them, ordered by the High Council to assess the situation personally. He walked through the ruined streets and saw humans already beginning to rebuild. They were clearing rubble and treating wounded and planting new crops in fields. Scarred by battle, he found Marcus Webb sitting on the steps of what had once been the community center. The old soldier looked up at him with tired eyes. "You won," Xyrith said, struggling to understand how such a thing was possible. "You were farmers. You were civilians. How did you win?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then he looked out at the people of New Haven, working together in the aftermath of horror. Grace Porter was handing out bread she had baked that morning. Patrick Cole was helping children search for lost pets. Christina Hayes was coordinating rescue teams with the same calm voice she had used to coordinate ambushes. "We're the same people we were before the attack," Marcus said finally. "We're still gentle. We still care about each other. We still want peace." He stood up, his old bones aching from days of fighting. "But we also know what we're capable of when peace isn't an option. That's the thing about humans, Commander. Our kindness isn't weakness. It's a choice we make every day. And when that choice is taken from us, we become something else entirely." Xyrith looked at the old soldier and finally began to understand. The galaxy had seen human compassion and assumed it was all there was. They had been catastrophically wrong. Diane Race walked over to stand beside Marcus. Together, they watched their colony slowly coming back to life. There was so much work to do, so many wounds to heal, so many losses to mourn, but they would do it. They would rebuild. They would create something beautiful again from the ashes and blood, because that was also what humans did. They endured. They adapted. They survived. And they never, ever gave up. The Galactic Consortium would remember this lesson for a very long time.